All right, Adonica, whenever you're ready.
Right. Well, we're good to go. Good afternoon, everyone. This session is going to be on juvenile justice grant reporting. Thanks everyone for hanging in. I know we're kind of a little later in the day. I promise our presentation will not be very painful. I'm Adonica McAllister, and I am the lead planner for the juvenile justice team.
Tony Lockley, Juvenile Justice Specialist for the JJ team.
And we are a small team. We're a very small team. We also have one other part-time planner, and then we have two other employees that are responsible for things outside of grant management. We're going to be talking today about the reports for Title II funding as well as our Children's Justice Act funding. We first always introduce our Juvenile Justice Planning Committee. The committee is who decides what's funded and anything that we want to do with our grant program that may be beneficial to our subrecipients or to bring folks in. So our Juvenile Justice Planning Committee provides resources for youth who are at risk of becoming delinquent due to individual, school, family, peer, or community factors. These resources provide services for youth in our communities across the state, some of them justice involved, some of them not justice involved. As I shared just a couple minutes ago, our Juvenile Justice Planning Committee administers two federal grant programs. The first is a very small funding source, and it's called our Children's Justice Act funding, and that's from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The other being the larger of the two, yet still pretty small, is our Title II Formula Grant Program for the state of North Carolina, and that's through the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention.
And as Adonica just mentioned, the Children's Justice Act, Section 107A of the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, or CAPTA, it provides federal funding to help states improve the investigation and management of child abuse cases. This funding supports things like child advocacy centers, prevention programs, and professional training. These grants are intended to develop and operate programs that enhance the assessment, investigation, and prosecution of suspected child abuse and neglect cases in the state. However, direct services are not allowable under these grants. And just as a reminder, the CJA funds are not meant for primary prevention programs or treatment services.
So we're primarily looking at funding programs that address gaps within our child welfare system. And for our Title II funding, OJJDP provides funds to states to help implement comprehensive juvenile justice plans and programs based on the needs of the state and the priorities of our current administration. Other factors play into the types of programs that we look at, and we are required to support any combination of 23 federally required program areas. And so based on that, we report performance for budgeted programs to the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. So there are a few required reports. I know you all have been listening to the workshops for a while. So the first being our progress reports, and information's been shared about that already. All subrecipients have to complete that. And so it's important to note that all of the reports have to be submitted by their deadlines. As our colleagues shared in the different funding sources, delays in receiving reports or non-receipt of reports impacts the level of funding that we will receive as a state. On the other side of that, non-submission of reports will also impact your ability to receive reimbursements, and your projects will go on hold. So, to further reiterate, our subrecipients report performance to us, and we then compile the reports and we report the data to our federal partners. And this data informs, other areas of our federal budget, how much we are allocated as a state, and what other resources may become available in the future.
So all GCC funded projects are required to provide an annual project progress report. And this aligns with the goals and objectives from your grant application. In addition to this, CJA and JJ projects must also submit a mid-year and final report. If your project is granted an extension, additional reports may be required. This year, all reports will be uploaded through the EBS system. That's if you had previously used GEMS, you'll be using EBS now. It might seem like a big shift, but we've worked to make EBS user-friendly. And your project director will be your primary contact for all correspondence related to your project, and that includes report submissions or deadlines or any other details. And that also includes any automated reminders from EBS. So if you have any questions or need assistance, just reach out to your project director. And here, as you can see in this chart, it provides just an overview of all GCC funded projects. It highlights important details like the type of the grant for each project that it falls under, specific reports you may need to submit, and the activity periods for those reports that it covers. So CJA, well, Children's Justice Act reporting. As Kevin had mentioned earlier, the names of the reports may change because we recognize that it's a little confusing for the CJA reports since they're labeled as JJ mid and final reports. And again, you will need to submit both a mid-year and a final report through EBS, and that process would be downloading the necessary report templates and then uploading them back into EBS. As you can see in this chart, you'll just see again another visual breakdown of all of the GCC funded projects, and it includes the details such as the type of grant, the name of the report, and any specific activity periods that are covered and their due dates. So for the current report questions, when you're working on your reports, you will focus on the activities and outputs, and this is where you would describe what your project has been doing. Focusing on specific activities outlined in your grant application, things like evidence-based training, programs, or interventions. And then for your goals and accomplishments, you would share any success stories or new programming or any other type of highlights. This would be a good time to show how your project is achieving its intended outcomes. For your outcomes and impact of project on the system, this is where you would basically show how your project has been impacted by the system as a whole. And you would also be sure to include any changes in the participants or results from the evaluation efforts.
And as Tony stated, these 3 questions are actually the 3 report questions that are currently required by CJA subrecipients and programs.
So for your performance measures, the Children's Justice Act Task Force is currently working to develop performance measures that will be implemented in October 1st, 2025. These are the ones that, the performance measures are being developed by our CJA work groups and from the following disciplines: clinical services, where the group will basically be working to create measures to enhance the effectiveness and the quality of mental health and medical services. The child welfare, they'll be looking at developing performance measures that would improve how we protect and support children. Prosecution and law enforcement, they would focus on performance measures to make procedures for handling and prosecuting child abuse and neglect cases more effective. And racial equity, this group will be working on performance measures to ensure that our practices and policies promote fairness and address any disparities. And the goal for updating these performance measures is so that we can collect more meaningful data that informs decision-making at the state level. So CJA reporting tips. Even though the questions in the CJA reports are narrative-based, Try to include quantitative data wherever possible. Clearly describe how you're collecting and measuring the data, and don't hesitate to highlight success stories or real world examples that demonstrate your project's impact. And by doing so, this really helps provide a fuller picture of your project's success and informs future decision making.
All right, thank you, Tony.
Mhm.
I'm going to go ahead and talk about our juvenile justice reporting. For ages, it's been referred to as juvenile justice. In the EBS system, you may see your report referred to as Title II reporting. We're trying to update some of the language that we use around our grant programs. So I say that to say I'll use probably these terms interchangeably. So as with CJA, our reports are identified inside of our system as a JJ mid and final report. I really want everyone who's funded by juvenile justice or Title II funds to note the difference in the deadlines. All of the other reports pretty much have an end of month deadline. We are required to report performance to the federal government by the end of the month, and so we have a need to collect that data from you all a couple weeks early so that we can go through, just like CJI said, kind of with their reporting and criteria. The very unique thing about our JJ grants is that we are on a calendar year. So for Title II only, not Children's Justice Act, we're on a calendar year. Our grants run from January to December. However, our system operates according to the federal fiscal year. So you may find that you'll have a mid-year report due by April 15th, but the activity period, while it covers October to March, you should only report on activities from January to March. You can't report on any activities that have occurred outside of the grant, and you can't be reimbursed for activities that have occurred outside of the grant activity period. So I'm going to do a high level overview because as with our Children's Justice Act funding, we have charged our committees with developing some more detailed and comprehensive performance measures so that we can get more quality data. But our current report contains 24 questions, which cover both quantitative and qualitative report data. And the report criteria, like I said, we're hoping to update prior to the new award start dates. Um, Again, the unique thing is that we're on a calendar year, so though we will be accepting applications this year, many of you who have been funded by Title II recognize that your award will not open until January of 2026. Plenty of time. We hope and aspire to have some training for any new performance measures and any updates for our subrecipients, just because it is quite a while before we may have some contact with you. So the quantitative report data may include count data like the frequency or capacity of your program activities, any referral sources. So, for example, if your youth are referred into your program or if you refer youth out to other programs, that's information that the federal government is interested in knowing because we're looking at how our juvenile justice system operates as a whole. And of course, we'd like outputs and outcomes. So, any numbers that you're able to report that can substantiate and illustrate the work that you've done during the course of your project. Now, not all of the quantitative questions apply to all programs that are funded. So that's why we're not going over specific questions because truly our report questions are program specific as they currently are. Now, our qualitative report questions are very similar to the Children's Justice Act questions, and these are things that you can report on in addition to your quantitative data, or if you don't have count data for your specific type of program, we certainly encourage you and require for you to complete and answer any qualitative report questions that you can. These include what your accomplishments were within the reporting period, any goals that were accomplished as they relate to your grant application. So, if you've accomplished things or, you had some kind of unintended accomplishments through the project that's funded, certainly share that with us, but also report based on your goals and objectives. We'd like to know what problems or barriers you may have encountered. That's helpful for us to know what sort of technical assistance to provide, and also helpful so that we can request technical assistance from the federal government where we may not be able to assist. Um, this is something that we've talked about the last few years. There's been a big problem and barrier for many of our GCC projects, and I think everybody knows what I'm referring to, the COVID pandemic. And then finally, we like success stories. Any success story that details your impact is useful. This is information that we love to highlight and share with others. And the federal government also enjoys highlighting that information about the successes and the good work that you're doing for youth across our state. So this is just a screen from how our report previously appeared in the GEM system. And some of the reporting requires that you disaggregate your data by race and ethnicity, age, and gender wherever possible. So the more detail, if it relates to your program, the better, because again, that helps substantiate the need and the impact of what we are funding across the state. Um, this is especially important for programs that are funded under our racial and ethnic disparities priority. We really like for our subrecipients to explain how your project aims to reduce racial disparities or promote racial equity within the juvenile justice system and amongst these youth that are in need of services. Um, we like to see an assessment and, we like for you all to provide the measures of your program's impact on youth of color to determine if there are any disparate outputs or outcomes that were improved. And we recognize that this is maybe quite an ask for a program that might, be a first time program and not have enough time. For programs that may have been funded for quite a while, we'd certainly like to see your progress over time in reducing racial and ethnic disparities where possible. So finally, much like Tony gave some reporting tips, we have just a couple. And the primary one and the most important, I think, is making sure that you all have a record keeping system and you collect the data based on the required reporting elements. As shared for new applications, this will likely be updated. We're working with our committees on this task now. Um, but if there's data that might be useful that you're not collecting and you may want to implement some sort of record keeping system, there are plenty of agencies that might be helpful, or you can reach out to us and maybe we can help brainstorm with you. Again, be honest about the barriers that you faced and realistic about any successes that you report to us. And then lastly, please contact our team or your grant manager if you experience any difficulty executing the work of your project. There, we may have, some recommendations for you, or we may be able to support you in a different way so that we can execute the services that you've been approved for funding. See, I promised we were short, sweet, and to the point. So here is our contact information, and this is our planning team for juvenile justice. And I guess we may have a couple minutes that we can take some questions from the chat. I can't see it, so if someone could read off some questions, if there are any, I'd appreciate it.
So Donica, right now you don't have any questions that are listed in the chat. I'll give a minute just to see if we get any that are in there. I'll just remind everybody that we did post a link to all of the different PowerPoints that you're seeing through today's presentation. In that link also, you'll be able to find the grants management guidelines, which is the manual that we've created for everybody to be able to follow for post-award process and procedures. And we'll be posting recordings of the workshops to that same spot. It'll probably be the first part of next week before we can get those all divided up and posted. And then we'll also be posting questions and answers if there are things within the chat that we weren't able to answer. I do see now, Adonica, you got a couple questions. Mary Jo Austell has said, hi, would prevention type services be allowable under CJA?
Hi, Mary Jo. So CJA does not fund services or direct services at all. Instead, we support system level programming. So our Children's Justice Act funds primarily go to initiatives like training, things that'll impact how the system works. We do some work with our statewide guardian ad litem programs, for example, to have victim-informed spaces. So things that impact the child welfare system at the system level is what we're seeking to fund and what's allowable to be funded by the Children's Justice Act.
You have a second question, Adonica. Are other agencies having trouble receiving reimbursements from juvenile justice? It says we have transportation reimbursement requests that haven't been paid since 2022. Could I get contact to inquire about this? I'm not
Sure. So the Division of Juvenile Justice, though we administer our Title II funds, is separate from the Governor's Crime Commission. However, if you reach out to me via email, I'll be happy to forward or connect you with someone over at Juvenile Justice. I can't necessarily speak to what their reimbursement process may be, but hopefully I can help connect you with someone that can.